Okay. Um, just read a really interesting article about accelerating returns and exponential curves. Moore's law, stuff like that, and how it seems to apply even to uh, eh, things that aren't necessarily technological or an increasing number of technological things. And so, the thesis of the author, who was rather pleased with himself, I suppose, was that, of course, that this factor, this observation that um, seems to be an accelerating pace of development, occurs not as a direct response to reaching a technological dead end, but rather independent of even being aware of that. In other words, you know, X gets twice as powerful every year until it runs out of room. And then there's some new approach to achieving what X achieves, and then that fills up its maximum ability. And as soon as they run out of ways to make that twice as good, then a new thing comes in, like that. So, one of the points that the guy was making was like, well, if we look at something like Pentium processors or whatever, it makes sense that they would gain the advantage of building upon their predecessors. Like, okay, well, now that I've made this Intel processor that goes at this speed, we don't start back at zero when we're making a new processor. We start there. So I get to use all of the things that have been learned in making all the previous ones into making this one, which is what the guy in the article was referring to as like a feedback loop sort of explanation for this quality of uh, exponential curves of things and accelerating returns. Um, and so the author of the article pointed out the fact that this continues to happen even when we run out of ability to double the existing model of Intel processor. Some new thing will come up, you know. And so his point being that none of the understandings of why this quality of accelerating returns occurs can account for these two seemingly exclusive realities. Um, well, his explanation is that it's an emergent quality of a large group of uh, self directing parts. And that self organization and this quality of accelerating returns is not implicit to the nature of large groups, which would imply that somehow it's what large groups necessarily do. Rather, it's a quality that's, I guess, implicit to the interactions of agents in the sense that it it emerges from this pattern that we observe of accelerating returns emerges from patternless chaos all by itself, which is also the explanation that you hear for things like, well, how do ants how do ants make their whole little city work and stuff? No individual is directing things. It's leaderless. and yet somehow a clear order and a clear shared sense of purpose and delegation of different jobs to different individuals and all that kind of stuff happens amongst ants, even though they are incredibly stupid. I mean, I was listening to this other thing about Emergence one time, and I was saying how you could get an ant to push a stick. You don't even have to get it to do it. That if a stick happens to land in the wrong spot, and it's the wrong size, and an ant can't move it, that one ant might spend the rest of its life pushing it 1 centimeter this direction and then 1 centimeter back the other direction, and again, forever, until it dies, I guess, because it's stuck. It has inadequate individual robustness of agency to adapt to so simple a conundrum as a little twig in its way. It can't even figure out it's time to quit, cut your losses, and go move a different stick or whatever. And yet somehow a fully functioning and extremely orderly society emerges from this assemblage of basically just like idiot stimulus response machines. Like it has a couple different things it does, right? And it like either runs away or it grabs something and carries it, or it follows the other ants. That's like it. That's all they do. It's very boring. So, emergence. Well, emergence is both a satisfying concept and an unsatisfying, inadequate one. The thing about it is, if you're saying, well, what is it? Why? Like, this guy's asking this great fundamental debate question. Why is it that accelerating returns occur? Nobody's saying, now let's do accelerating returns. They're unavoidably part of what we're doing. Well, the problem with that explanation, it doesn't really provide any additional insight in anything, except to say that that we can't explain it any further. It's like saying, well, why do well, let's see. I always wanted an analogy. That's how we understand things. That's how I understand things. I mean, if you've got some conception that you feel you have a good intuitive grasp of, like, I understand why this person might hit that person in a given context. Person A got very angry, and that anger caused person A to under-prioritize discretion or whatever. And then, so, when we're saying, like, well, why did blah, blah, blah happen? We've got a bunch of analogous situations, almost infinite number of them, in which we say, here's an example of something where I do know the answer to this question. Why? I know how to answer it, and I understand why I know how to answer it even. Because in that case, the question of, like, why did you hit him or something, the question is one of motivation and or a breakdown of checks and balances, sort of mental checks and balances, When I ask the question, why do accelerating returns occur, and I answer with emergence, it's not providing me anything except to say that all the usual answers are wrong. Because it's not, when I'm asking the question in this sense, I'm not asking a question that can be answered with a motivational answer. I'm not asking a question that can be answered probably with a physical answer. So, if I were to say, why does that thing float? I might be able to give a physical answer such as, it is buoyant, or whatever the explanation for buoyancy is, like the surface area, weight, whatever. I don't know sciencey stuff very much, but it's not that question about why do we have accelerating returns as a quality that seems to be implicit to the interaction of humans with one another. It won't be answerable with either of those kind of why answers. So there must be some other kind of why answer. Like, for example, if I were to say, why? Well, so what one way to approach this is to try to come up with an analogous why question. Why does humanity experience accelerating returns? Why does humanity experience increasing tolerance? I mean, I have a decent answer for that, right? It's basically empowered memes. It's like memes are more powerful as fluidity of information improves, and so naturally, and I think what you'd have to say is that the power of any given meme, especially if it's a normative meme, like what we ought to be doing, then the power of that is going to be predicated upon, or not predicated, but determined by, or the extent of the impact is going to be determined by determined by what? Determined by what? What was I saying? Oh yeah, that's right. I don't remember the oh yeah, that's right. Oh, right. So if you have empowered memes, normative memes, then, well, I mean, that's where analogy comes into play, right? It's like, it, here's the deal. Once we all agree on one thing, then, as I mentioned in a previous video, then that becomes locked into place at a certain point. Like, okay, we agree that this dickhead maneuver that you keep pulling is wrong in this one context. We can all agree on that finally. It took 400 years, but now we finally agree that kings don't have divine right. Once we all agree on that, then it becomes a dilemma that you can put people in, right? Well, we all agree on this, right? You say this, and this would seem to contradict the principle that is displayed in the first thing we all agreed on. So choose. Do you want to keep that thing we all agree on as agreed upon? Or do you want to change your position on this other thing that's comparable? Or do you want to explain why my analogy between the two things is wrong? Or not analogous, or whatever. Problem is, if it is a strong analogy, it wins. That's it, all the time I have right